Hey, guys, I'm here. And today, we're going to talk about this cursed doll that kills its owners. So in 1830, there was an artist by the name of Hester Piper, who many consider to be one of the most gifted and talented artists ever. And she spent her life creating some incredible works of art. She created so many fantastic works of art, actually, that even Queen Victoria herself had one of them in her own personal collection. And for a time, it seemed like nothing could stop Hester from creating more fantastic works of art and being successful in her craft. But then something very strange started to happen. You see, Hester was known for creating these incredibly lifelike dolls, which were so realistic looking that they were actually very popular among her clients. But after creating one particular doll, strange things started to occur. See, Hester's niece passed away shortly after receiving the doll as a gift. Then one of her other clients received the doll as a wedding gift, and she, too, would pass away under mysterious circumstances. So, needless to say, the doll kind of got a reputation as being cursed. And even though Hester tried to deny that anything was wrong with it, it seemed as though anyone who owned the doll was doomed to die. And before we move on, make sure you guys go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below. It really does help me out. Also, if you're just here for the stories and not the art, feel free to skip to the next chapter. But I do recommend sticking around because who knows, maybe you'll find an interest in art as we go through this journey together. As I mentioned, Hester Piper was one of the most talented artists ever, and she spent her entire life traveling the country, showing off her work and selling it. Her dolls were some of her most prized possessions, and she put all of her heart and soul into each and every one of them. In fact, she was so good at what she did that when you looked at her dolls, it was almost impossible to tell that they were fake. They looked so real, in fact, that they would even blink. And she did this by putting little bits of clockwork inside of them. And she also dressed them up in clothes that she designed and sewed herself. So once again, they were as close to real girls as you could get without it actually being a real girl. And because of this, they were very expensive and very sought after. And while Hester had a decent amount of success during her lifetime, she never really became rich or famous. This was mainly due to the fact that she suffered from severe depression throughout her entire life. And there were actually times where she attempted to take her own life. As a result of this, she would spend long periods of time just sitting around in her room, not doing anything. And it wasn't until after she passed away that people realized just how talented she truly was. Because if she hadn't taken her own life, who knows how great of an artist she could have become. Now, as I mentioned before, Hester's specialty was making these incredibly lifelike dolls. And she made so many of them that it seemed like she was bound to eventually create one that was destined to bring her ill fortune. And that doll was named the Living Doll. Now, the story behind the doll is kind of strange because there are two different versions of it. And the first version dates back to 1830. At this point in Hester's career, she was already pretty well established, and she had a shop in London where she sold her art. One day, a woman entered her shop and told her that she wanted a doll that looked exactly like her daughter who had recently passed away. Hester accepted the request, and she went to work creating the most lifelike doll that she possibly could. And when she was finished, the woman loved it so much that she ordered a second one. But after receiving the second doll, the mother immediately became frightened. And you see, this second doll didn't look like the mother's daughter at all. Instead, it looked like Hester herself, and she had made the doll in her own reflection, without even realizing it. And as soon as the mother noticed this, she took the doll back and demanded that Hester fix it and make it look more like her daughter. Hester obliged, and she ended up destroying the doll in the process. So this was the first living doll. And unfortunately, it brought nothing but bad luck to everyone who came in contact with it. Now, this isn't the only version of the story, however. There is another one where instead of the mother commissioning the portrait of her daughter, it was actually Hester's niece who was used as the model. Now, whether or not this is true is hard to say, but either way, after Hester created the doll, It was given as a gift to her niece. But after she received it, strange things began to happen. See, not long after she got the doll, she started to become very sick. And as she grew weaker and weaker, she told her family that the doll was cursed. But they didn't listen to her and they continued to give her the doll as a gift. And sadly, this caused her health to deteriorate and she ended up passing away. And after she was buried, the family was shocked to find out that her grave had already been dug up. To this day, no one knows what happened to the doll, but it's believed that it was the reason behind the girl's death. And in both versions of the story, the doll brings nothing but bad luck to everyone around it. Now, some people say that Hester made the doll using dark magic, and that is why it was so realistic. But others say that Hester simply created a doll that was destined to cause nothing but pain. Either way, after hearing these stories, Hester destroyed the doll, but not before it managed to curse her and everyone else around her. You see, after the incident with the doll, Hester's life began to fall apart. She lost all of her money and all of her clients, and she ended up taking her own life. And when her body was discovered, it was found floating in a lake with the words, "The Living Doll," carved into her forehead. Now, some people say that she carved the words into her own forehead before jumping into the lake, while others say that it was done to her after she passed away. Either way, this was the end of Hester Piper and the living doll. Or was it? Well, according to legend, after Hester passed away, the curse of the doll didn't end. In fact, it only grew stronger. You see, after Hester's death, there were many other artists who tried to create a doll that was as lifelike as possible. But none of them were ever able to replicate the same level of realism that Hester achieved. However, there was one artist who was determined to try, and his name was Charles Babbage. Now, Charles had heard the stories about Hester Piper and the living doll, but he didn't believe them. He thought they were just fairy tales meant to scare children. And he was determined to prove that it was possible to create a lifelike doll without any dark magic involved. So he set out to create the ultimate doll. And when he was finished, he named it Diana. And Charles was proud of his creation, and he decided to show it off at an exhibition. But as soon as people laid eyes on the doll, they became frightened. And it wasn't because it was ugly or creepy. It was because it was so lifelike. They said that it was so realistic looking that it scared them, and they felt as though it was judging them as they walked by. And because of this, Charles ended up destroying the doll. And ever since then, no one has ever tried to create a lifelike doll again. Now, whether or not Charles used dark magic in his creation is unknown. But some say that Hester's curse followed him, and that's why he destroyed his own creation. After all, Charles was only trying to prove that Hester's curse wasn't real. But what if it was? What if every time someone tried to create a lifelike doll, Hester's curse would follow them and cause them to destroy their own creation? And what if this is the reason that we haven't seen any good horror movies in decades? See, it's no secret that Hollywood is full of people who use dark magic in their creations. And it's believed that this is the reason that we haven't seen any good horror movies in decades. They've all been cursed by Hester Piper. Of course, this is all speculation, and there's no concrete evidence to prove any of this, but it makes you wonder, what if? What if every time someone tried to create a lifelike doll, they were destined to fail? And what if this is the reason that we haven't seen any good horror movies in decades? Well, that's the end of the video. Let me know your thoughts on the comment section below. And, as always, thanks for watching.